Welcome to today's session, very quick session, create database project for use with Azure Synapse Link for SQL Server 2022. Probably one of the longest titles you will hear during today's event. So, very quickly go through the agenda. I'm going to do a super fast bio. Then I'm going to show you all how to create a database project that you can use to deploy to both SQL Server 22 database that you're using as part of a Synapse Link deployment and the dedicated SQL Pool, which you intend to use as your destination. And then I will show you how you can actually do that within Azure DevOps to be able to update both of them at the same time. So, time for the super fast bio. Those of you watching right now, more than welcome to print screen to find me online. Those of you watching the video, welcome to hit the pause as well. A couple of new things in my bio more recently. Well, actually this week, I'm now what's known as a dual category MVP. So basically I'm awarded in both the data platform and developer technologies categories. And in addition to that, I found out yesterday that I gained the Azure Enterprise Data Analyst Architect certification, just like a few of you who are watching this session at the moment. And congratulations to all of you as well, by the way. So, what have I got set up in place for this particular lightning talk? I have a SQL Server 2022 instance running on a virtual machine. However, to save me showing you all the ins and outs of the virtual machine, etc., I'm just going to use Azure Data Studio to show you the database. So I will show you that in a minute. Actually, I will show you that now. So here is the database. If I run a new query and run select that version, just to show there are no smoke and mirrors here, this is a SQL Server 2022 database. And we're going to get rid of that. In addition to that, I have a dedicated SQL Pool running. So let me just go on over and I will show you that running now. So we go to here, you can see I have a dedicated SQL Pool that only contains 2 tables. And it only contains 2 tables because that's what I've got configured in Azure Synapse Link, which is the third item that I set up for today. And I saw some of you saw this in an earlier session, and I'm not going to go into the details too much. Just know the link is set up to get data out of the SQL Server database and put it into my dedicated SQL Pool. And finally, I have an empty Git repository as well. However, during the next 10 minutes, it won't be empty. Well, however, it won't be empty for much longer, is what I should say. So, first things first, and create this database project. So, I'm going to use Azure Data Studio to do this. And to do this in Azure Data Studio, you need the SQL Database Projects extension. Once you have that extension, you can do a few things, including right-clicking the database and selecting Create Project from Database. So from here, I'm just going to put in here for the actual. That's if I connect up to it first. Just bear with me. Now I can do it. Now. So here, I'm just going to quickly change the name of the actual project. And I'm going to give it a location. And what will happen is a database folder will essentially be created in this location. You don't have to create a subfolder with the project name. I just want to make sure everybody's aware of that so you don't end up with a messy folder structure. And then I can just click on create here. And it's going to say, do you want to restart Azure Data Studio? So it creates a new workspace for me. I say, yeah. And then it's going to restart. Once it has restarted, I can go to database projects, and you can see I've got a database project here. And one thing I want to do is change the target platform, because this is based on the copy of World Importers database for SQL Server 2016, which brings me to a point I want to get across about Azure Synapse Link here. You can use a database in SQL Server 2022 with a compatibility level of SQL Server 2016 for Synapse Link. Anyway, now I've created this project, I actually want to make the folder that the project is in become a Git repository. So If I click on source control, it very kindly gives me an initialize repository button. I'm just checking the chat here. Right, okay. So if I click on there, it asks me if I want to make the current folder that the project is in the Git repository. So I'm like, yeah. So I click on there. It finds all the existing files inside the database project, or inside the folder basically. And it allows me to do what's known as an initial commit. So now I have a Git repository locally on my laptop, not one that's got the data in Azure DevOps yet. So what I have to do to get that working is to actually set up what is known as a remote. So in order to do that, I have to copy this link, go back in Azure Data Studio, click on here, remote, add remote, give it the name, and there you go. Call it origin. And from there, once that's done, I can push it to the Azure DevOps repository. So that is how you create a database project and you can sync it with Azure DevOps. So if I click on refresh now, you will see it's there. Now, before I look to run any pipelines or anything, something important I must do, and you must do as well, is make sure you stop your Synapse Link before you go to deploy any updates. And luckily, because I'd updated this repository, I hadn't used continuous integration yet. So what you can do is set up various pipelines to deploy your updates from this repository. They can be YAML based, or they can be what's known as a classic editor based, which is a nice GUI format. And I'm aware that a lot of engineers prefer the GUI format. So this is what I'm going to demo now. So basically, you can create a GUI based pipeline that goes, first of all, creates a DAT pack based for SQL Server database, which you can then publish to Azure DevOps. However, I also want to create a separate DAT pack, which only contains the information I need to deploy to those two tables in the dedicated SQL pool. So in order to do that, I copy all of the repository to a secure location on whichever agent is doing all the work for the pipeline. I then change the target platform and by using PowerShell, is the line, the DSP line in the SQL project file, and that prepares it, then makes it ready to be used for a dedicated SQL pool. I then do a similar thing to put in all of the excluded folders and files. So basically, I just want the sales schema and the two files for the order and order lines tables. I then make sure I remove the SP add extended property reference out of the schema file because it's not supported. It's for dedicated the DAT packs basically. Then I go through the order line SQL file because there's a lot of things I don't want to go over to the dedicated SQL pool, like I said, to remove lines that have got constraints in and remove references to the indexes, etc. And then I do a similar thing with the orders file and something else as well, because if we go to look in orders file, so go back to database project, go to cells, go to tables, you will notice there's some varchar max columns here. And basically, if you go to create a DAT pack for a dedicated SQL pool, by default, and it's the table, it's got varchar max columns in, the build of the DAT pack will fail if you try and do it in Azure DevOps. So what you effectively have to do is make sure you specify at the end of the SQL file that it's going to be used for a heap. And you have to explicitly state that, as you can see here. That way your DAT pack will be fine. If you don't, you are going to have problems. And also remember as well, if you're working with special characters in your PowerShell, to use the escape character as well. Or again, you will have issues. And then once all of that's done, I can build a DAP pack based on that copied version of the project, which is then ready to be published into Azure DevOps as well. And then from there, I can use the GUI releases feature, like you can see has already taken place here recently, to deploy to, first of all, the SQL Server 2022 instance, which is near enough unchanged from the original database project, and then the customized one to the dedicated SQL Pool. And then once the deployment has completed in Azure DevOps, you can go back in and then you can start your Synapse Link again. And that, everybody, is how you can create a database project based on the SQL Server 22 database you're using for Azure Synapse Link, and then use Azure DevOps to actually deploy the updates to both that SQL Server database and the dedicated SQL pool you intend to use for your destination. So that is a very quick version of this. Does anybody have any questions about this at all? I am going to convert this at some stage to be a YAML pipeline, and I will make that publicly available as a template, and I will, of course, do a blog post for it as well.